Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 4th of March, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wired. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike. And I know why you said 2018, because it's actually a one-year anniversary for some very important news story.
It absolutely is. Well, a year's gone past since the Skripal poisoning. Well, has much changed? Actually, quite a bit has changed. We're going to do a little bit of a review here. But nonetheless, a year has gone past. It is the first anniversary. In order to mark that, our friend Gavin, our Secretary of State for War, has announced £11 million to boost our chemical defences. So this is the range of measures include developing plans to deploy drones and robots into potentially hazardous areas, putting personnel in less danger and identifying threats faster, boosting the Defence and Science Technology Laboratory's ability to analyse substances by investing in new technological capabilities, and keeping the UK at the forefront of medical advances to combat the effects of chemical agents. Well, goodness knows, we have seen how great the National Health Service is at treating Novichok poisoning, because...
And that's the deadliest nerve agent known to man, we were told. 10 times more deadly than VX, right?
Right.
And so, yeah.
So they've done a good job. But anyway, this is what Gavin had to say. Britain and its allies have also demonstrated that they will take a stand against the use of chemical weapons, from the sanctions enforced on Russia following the reckless use of Novichok to the strikes against the chemicals used by the Syrian regime. Well, that's quite prescient, because we'll be talking about both these issues today. Now, the press, of course, have gone nuts over this. This was the Daily Mail from yesterday. The Novichok files, it was a year ago this week, but only now can the full chilling truth of the Salisbury poisoning be told in minute-by-minute detail by those who lived through it. So this is a massive expose in the press, lots of other press covering this as well. I'm not going to waste my time going through this article because it is a waste of time. But nonetheless, and just by coincidence, Patrick, it's just a coincidence that in Ireland today, officers wearing hazardous material uniforms, hazmat suits, are now entering the Department of Health. So this was literally a few minutes before we came on air that this started to break in Dublin. And apparently the Irish Examiner is saying that it's understood an envelope containing white powder has led to the Department of Health being evacuated. That envelope was apparently addressed directly to the Health Minister, Simon Harris, TD. Well, they just decided to do that on the 1-year anniversary of Novichok poisoning in Salisbury. Pat?
It's probably just a coincidence, and that's probably not a drill. Just wanted to point that out in case there's any conspiracy theorists out there. Don't get any funny ideas.
No, indeed. Well, let's have a look at what Treason May had to say. She said, "Today is an important milestone for Salisbury as it emerges from the shadow cast by the use of chemical weapons on the streets of our city. Now, 12 months on, we see this historic city welcoming thousands of visitors and tourists as it plans for a positive and prosperous future. The fact Salisbury and the wider region has fought back so well from such a devastating and reckless institute is testament to the resolve, forbearance and positivity of the community." So there you go. You couldn't do much better. Now let's just remind ourselves about a year ago what the Russian response was to these allegations. Here is Sergei Narishkin, who is the Foreign Intelligence Services, the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Services. He said this in April: "The Skripal affair is a grotesque provocation crudely staged by British and US intelligence." That was followed up by Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, saying London somehow will have to offer its apologies to the Russian side, but obviously it's going to be a long story and the idiocy of it has gone too far. Yes, indeed. And let's also remind ourselves what the mainstream media was saying at the time, because here's Alex Thompson, not from the UK column, but from Channel 4 News. And he was saying in March about the only decisive public move by the authorities has been to censor mainstream media via a D-notice last week from fully identifying Mr. Skripal's MI6 handler living nearby. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting, of course, because we should remember that Skripal's MI6 handler was Pablo Miller, and Pablo Miller, of course, associated with Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS, and so on, and the dodgy dossier against Trump. And well, it may well be the case, Patrick, although I don't know that we know this for certain, that Sergei Skripal himself may have been involved in producing that dossier. But the key point is here that what we're dealing with is the deep state, Spookland, and a privatized cell, apparently, in the Salisbury area. So was this the Russians attacking that or not? I think we may have a pretty clear view that it certainly was not. This was a PR exercise from the beginning, is how it seems to me.
Well, if there was a D notice placed on mentioning somebody who people already knew, Mike, I think that's kind of a giveaway as to where you maybe should start looking. But then again, there's a lot of unanswered questions about this story, and there's a lot of diversion and deflection in the media and in the political sphere as well. So I think the one thing they don't want you to do is to sort of really get down to the provenance of the case itself. And so where are we now with this case?
Well, the question in the chat box is how many Brits at this stage do not know who Pablo Miller is? I think actually it's quite a significant proportion of British people don't know who Pablo Miller is, because he has not been discussed in the mainstream press. And really, unless you've dug into this story and looked at what's behind the headlines, it's unlikely that you'll have come across the name. Okay, well, let's move on here. Here's, of course, as the year went on, very quickly we started to get the allegations against individuals, and here's Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Borisov, the two that, well, what were they? Russian tourists? We don't know, that were allegedly responsible for this. At the time, it was reported that this was not thought to be their real names, but we haven't got any alternative names. But it didn't end with these two. Because apparently, just reported today, just coincidentally, on the first anniversary, in fact, it's now 5 more. So this is a total of seven suspects over the failed plot to kill Sergei Skripal. Well,
they're just stretching this out, Mike, aren't they? I mean, to see what you can milk out of this story, see how long you can stretch it. And of course, it's always good to announce these things on the 1-year anniversary, isn't it?
Absolutely. The timing is extremely interesting. And of course, there was not just one poisoning, but 2. And the experts confirmed, according to this BBC News article, that the Amesbury poisoning, which followed the Skripal poisoning, was also Novichok. And the substance that killed a woman in Amesbury was the same Novichok nerve agent that poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal. Experts have confirmed. That's good stuff. It went on because it got even more ridiculous with the Dame Sally Davies, the chief medical officer, suggesting that if the people were concerned that they may have got Novichok on personal items, they should simply clean it off with cleansing or baby wipes. And this really brought the mainstream media narrative to an absolute low, and we've got to wonder what Dame Sally Davies was thinking to be saying or making this statement with a straight face. But look, Patrick, the one thing that struck me about the Skripal case was that, in a sense, it was quite similar to September 11th in the sense that it was used to kick off other things. Now, in the case of September 11th, of course, that was used to kick off some somewhat more dramatic events in terms of what was able to be shown in the mainstream press, bombs going off and countries being invaded and this kind of thing. But nonetheless, we had some things over the past year as a result of this come in that are of interest. And the first one that I want to mention is the National Security Capability Review, because, of course, this really launched the attack on the alternative media and the shoring up of the mainstream media. So, you know, what are we talking about here? Cairncross Review came out of this, Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee investigation into fake news. There was a House of Lords report into fake news, and also all the government pressure on social media organisations. But what also came out of it was the fusion doctrine. Building a culture of common purpose across departments requires improved accountability to shift incentives and behaviours towards a more genuinely whole of government approach. So we've started to see government working much closely, the government departments working much closer together. We've particularly the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence, almost operating as a single government agency, and also government working with NGOs and charities and so on to push forward with the narrative.
And government working with the mainstream press much closer in order to streamline talking points. And when you see an intelligence source, which we'll show you in a minute, an intelligence source has told our newspaper that such and such has done such and such, that's also part of the fusion doctrine, in my opinion, Mike, although it's more unofficial and off the books.
Absolutely. But it went on because in July, Theresa May announced that the G7 leaders had agreed to establish a rapid response mechanism. And as we were talking about on the Sunday Wire last night, what this meant was that not only are government agencies working together with other organizations through the fusion doctrine, but this allows the leaders of the G7 to come up with a narrative, attribute blame, and then have that narrative repeated by all the other G7 leaders. So just as narratives are repeated by all the mainstream outlets, all the mainstream media outlets, and there's no real competition there, the same goes for the G7 leaders. You have a standard narrative, a common purpose perhaps, but it doesn't end there, because also established was the government's propaganda mill, and this is the rapid response unit within the Cabinet Office. And of course, what are they doing? They're watching social media extremely closely and dealing with narratives that appear in social media that they don't like. But it didn't end there because, of course, we have the Foreign Commonwealth Office's Counter Disinformation and Media Development Programme. Now, this has been running for a little bit longer, a couple of years, but it certainly has been ramped up in the last 12 months. According to Alan Duncan, is designed to protect national security by countering disinformation directed in the UK at the UK and its allies from Russia. Russia persistently uses disinformation to target its perceived enemies. An example was the Russian disinformation campaign that followed the attack in Salisbury, which was intended to distract from Russian culpability. Information about individual projects within the programme will not be published, as this information could then be used to actively attempt to disrupt and undermine the programme's effectiveness. So this is the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Programme. And just as a brief reminder, this is really how it looks. We've got Mark Sedwill here, who's the he's the head of the Civil Service. He's also the National Security Advisor to Treason May. So he's in charge of the National Security Council. He's also in charge of the Cabinet Office. And they, of course, feed into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, their Counter Disinformation and Media Development Programme, headed up by Andy Price, who we're not allowed to know anything about. And here we go, because this was the other thing that came to light as a result, the Integrity Initiative. So as I say, Andy Price, we're not allowed to know anything about him, but of course, part of his role is about media development, and this is about the development of narratives in the media. And as we say, the Integrity Initiative has also come out of this. And so what we have seen as a result of this event, which took place 12 months ago today, is probably the biggest propaganda machine that the West has seen, perhaps.
And this is an important point, Mike, because the reaction to the UK government's action and reaction to Skripal, increased sanctions, expel Russian diplomats, accuse everybody of being spies, and up the rhetoric a la Gavin Williamson and threats made to Russia.
Right.
But that's, to me, a much smaller part of what has come out of Skripal. The big thing that has come out of Skripal, the more wide-ranging shift and change, is what you've just described here, which is using the Skripal affair, using the Novichok chemical weapons attack on our soil story to ramp up state censorship and to clamp down on free speech, freedom of expression, any dissenting opinions that might go against the rapid reaction mechanism. Okay, so increased power by the state and by state affiliated think tanks, coordinating between think tanks and the press. Okay, so the fusion doctrine being a kind of Orwellian system, that is the big takeaway from Skripal, actually, because that keeps going, Mike. Even when Skripal's washed away in the sands of history, that new system of censorship by the state, working with very shady organizations like the Atlantic Council and these sort of people advising governments on who to delete, which social media accounts should be deleted, accusing people of being Russian bots who are real people. These are the sort of things they get up to, and running coordinated smear campaigns and discrediting people. Some of these things are in the Integrity Initiative leaks.
Yes.
So that's the big takeaway from Skripal, and that's what I think people really need to understand. The same in the United States with Russiagate, with Trump-Russia collusion. The big takeaway is just across the board social media censorship to combat the Russian threat or Russian disinformation. Goldstein, 1984.
Absolutely. And then just to close this section off then, the other big question which still remains is, where are the Skripals? We don't know. Do you know?
I don't know. Missing persons alert. Have you seen these two people? If you have, please let us know or let somebody know, because nobody has seen them in the last year. Of course, Yulia will likely be much more thin and demure than she looks in that photo. Sergei probably looking much the same as his normal self. So if you do see anything or hear anything about the Skripals, I'm sure their family is concerned, Mike. They haven't seen them either for the last year.
Now, you mentioned the accusations of spying and the kicking out of diplomats. But again, coincidentally, 1 year later, that seems to have ramped up somewhat.
Well, this story was released March 2nd. It's the Mail on Sunday, actually. This is from the Mail Online, but this actually appeared in the Mail on Sunday. So apparently, they're accusing the Russian ambassador, Alexander Yakovenko, from Russia. He's ambassador to London. There he is right there. So they're accusing him of being a former KGB spy, and they're saying that he was expelled from the United States in 1986 in something called Operation Famish, which was under the Ronald Reagan administration, where they got rid of a whole load of Soviet spies. So they're claiming that Yakovenko, when he was working for the Soviet Union's UN mission in New York during that time, he was only 27 years old, that he would have been expelled in Operation Famish. Yet, we look at the article and we look at the evidence, and there's no actual evidence to back this up. This is a hypothesis put forward by the author of this. And so he's saying during Mr. Yakovenko's reign, some 28 of his diplomats have been expelled from Britain, including 23 last year after Skripal, we're talking about here. So announcing the expulsions in March last year, Treason May said that the diplomats had been identified as undeclared intelligence officers, identified by the British government, of course. Whether they were spies or not is anyone's guess. Why then did authorities here in Britain allow Mr. Yakovenko to have a diplomatic visa? And this is the author of Ben Lazarus, the author here from the Mail on Sunday of this article. So they're making a play for the Russian ambassador to the UK, trying to get him his passport or his diplomatic visa stripped. This is what this article is doing. This is quite serious. Let's see how serious this is. Yakovenko must go. Who is pushing this right now? Well, none other than Ian Austin, MP, recent refugee from the Tory party, I believe?
Labour Party.
Labour Party, yeah. Okay. And Bob Seeley, MP, have contacted Jeremy Hunt, demanding that something must be done. Something must be done. We have a KGB spy in our midst, and we must do something about this. Yakovenko must go. Very serious indeed. So this is taking it to a new level, okay? This is the reply here from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, and she's saying this tactic is not new, it's a stupid one, but we are not to expect anything else from the current UK government that orchestrates campaigns in the media based on constant quote-unquote leaks. So this is yet another one from an intelligence official has told the Mail on Sunday. We don't know who, and it's maybe their guess, maybe their opinion, but it's being reported in the wording in such a way that it's seen to be as fact.
Is this Integrity Initiative at work?
It could very well be, but so they roll out the usual suspects, and here he is, Sir Malcolm Rifkin, and what does he have to say? He says, in light of the Mail on Sunday's reporting, I would expect that British and American intelligence communities just now sharing information regarding why the current Russian ambassador to London looks like, this is a key, looks like he was requested to leave America in 1986. Looks like.
Was he or was he not?
Well, even Malcolm Rifkin doesn't even know. So this is such a poor standard of journalism. This is not journalism. This is basically a smear campaign.
It's propaganda.
It's propaganda. So, and by the way, this is Malcolm Rifkin. He was in the news recently, Mike. I can't remember what it was for, but him and Jack Straw.
Oh, that was about a year and a half ago, probably, and that was about some kind of secret filming where he seemed to be willing to take a bung from a Chinese company for favors in the House of Commons.
Was it $5,000 or $10,000?
I think it was 10,000 each.
Was it
each was
10,000?
being offered. Yeah.
It's not very much money for these guys.
No.
Anyway, so there's the usual suspects. Well, you only have to go as far as the Henry Jackson Society. Here's Dr. Andrew Foxall. He's a lovely, good-looking young man here. He's saying that Alexander Yakovenko would be the most prominent Russian diplomat to be publicly outed as an intelligence officer since the Cold War. Beneath the charade, I'm using a deep voice, but I assure you that's not Andrew Foxall's deep voice. Says, beneath the charade of diplomatic buffoonery lies the dangerous reality of Vladimir Putin's right-hand man in London. Very nefarious. Only from the Henry Jackson Society can you get that sort of vitriol. And here's Rusi, not to be left out, Mark.
Galeotti.
Galeotti, pardon me, I'm not great with names sometimes. If, this is the key word, yes. Mike, if Mr. Yakovenko is forced to leave New York on suspicion of being a spy, there's no way London would not have known about it. And he goes on to say, to make a kind of, if it turns out, well, yeah, if it turns out that he was a known intelligence officer, it would be quite possible that we thought it might be to our advantage, so we let him in and so forth. So, interesting. So is this conspiracy theorizing, Mike? I can see the phone conversation between Ben Lazarus at the Daily Mail. So what do you think? What's your opinion? They say, I'm not sure, and they say, but if, and he'll take that as a quote.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. So this is the standard of journalism. And there's the man himself, and he says, perhaps, he's even in on the act, perhaps he will claim he was falsely accused. So he's already trying to head Yakovenko and the Russians off at the pass here. But it is high time we got proper answers to the many questions facing Britain's least funny diplomat, comical Alex. So what is this, Mike? What are we looking at here? What do you think all of this is?
It's sheer propaganda.
Has to be fake news.
Yes.
So there you go. That's on the one-year anniversary of the Skripal affair. Just a coincidence that story came out.
Yes. Now, Jeremy Corbyn tweeted this out last week, and I don't remember seeing it in the mainstream press, but I know you tweeted this out. He's saying, the UN says Israel's killings of demonstrators in Gaza, including children, paramedics and journalists, may constitute war crimes or crimes against humanity. The UK government must unequivocally condemn the killings and freeze arms sales to Israel. Has that happened?
Well, probably not.
Probably not. Yes. No. Well, it does not just Gaza, because it's the West Bank as well. So here is Mr. Netanyahu this morning, because an IDF officer was run over by a car. Because they were there to demolish houses, and so on. Well, one IDF soldier was badly injured. A second soldier was lightly injured, so they shot dead the two people in the car and shot the third person and arrested him.
Just for good measure. Yes,
and Netanyahu said, as you can see on screen there, I have ordered that the demolitions of these homes be sped up in the context of the restrictions, or at least within the restrictions of the judicial system. We're determined to continue our vigorous struggle against the murderers and against terrorism everywhere. So
who's the terrorist?
So who is the terrorist? I thought that last frame there on that video clip shows him pretty much, if you look at the eyes, the way that he probably is quite representative of him. But basically what we have here, Patrick, is the IDF supporting the destruction of people's homes in the West Bank.
It's called ethnic cleansing. in most people's book, Mike.
Indeed, and it seems that the only weapons that the people in the area had at their disposal was a car, and as a result, 2 young guys being shot dead and another one seriously injured and arrested. I'm not sure what the likely outcome for him once he's in Israeli custody is going to be, but nonetheless, Netanyahu going to accelerate the destruction of these people's homes.
That seems like terrorism to me.
So I think I agree with what Jeremy has said there with respect to us stopping arming Israel, just as we should be stopping arming Saudi Arabia, but for whatever reason, the British government doesn't seem to want to do that.
I'm not sure if you're covering the Corbyn story later in the show or not, the assault.
No, no.
Well, I just want to, we don't have anything up on screen for you, but just to let people know, after Jeremy Corbyn made that statement about Israel, last night he was a victim of a physical assault. I believe the police, charges have been filed
yes.
by the police, so
yes.
Jeremy Corbyn was assaulted. So I just wanted to make that point. I think it's important that Jeremy Corbyn, who's a leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition's, taking a very controversial but principled stand, that's a human rights stand, defending the Palestinian people, and then he is physically assaulted just a few days later, Mike. In public, and not a word about it in the mainstream press practically.
Well, there was a story finally this morning because the charges had been laid, but I didn't see very much about it over the weekend. That's for sure. Yes.
So there is a climate of hate apparently, and Jeremy Corbyn is a victim of a physical assault.
Yeah,
that's interesting how things come around.
Now let's move on to chemical weapons, Patrick, and the OPCW report.
Well, this is the long-anticipated report, Mike, and we got into this in depth on the Sunday Wire last night. And if you want a more detailed analysis, a longer segment, go ahead and listen to that up at 21stcenturywire.com. Mike and I went through some of the P's and Q's of this much-anticipated report. This is the report on the alleged chemical weapons attacks in Douma in April of 2018. So the OPCW has finally released their findings on this, and it's meant to, a lot of people were expecting this is going to implicate the Syrian government and by extension the Russians, because they're allied and working in the same areas in Syria for that war. So here is the report. There's the OPCW. They're based in The Hague. And what did this report show us this time? A lot of people thought that, well, here's the report itself. This is from the Technical Secretariat, their fact-finding mission. It's quite a long document. This is available online. You're very welcome, everybody, to go and inspect this document. There's a link to it at 21stcenturywire.com, or you can simply Google it or go to the OPCW's website, and I encourage people to do that. So here's what we discovered from this. These are some of the main takeaways. These are not all the main takeaways, and we will do probably a more in-depth analysis of this on another program, Mike, to do a follow-up on this. But this is what's important. Chlorine substances were present. Yellow cylinders may have been the source of those. So the gas release mechanism was not discussed. Witnesses' testimonies are inconsistent and rely heavily on, guess who?
The white helmets.
The white helmets. So the OPCW has not assigned blame. Okay, that's also important, although it seems some people in the media and people really pushing for regime change in Syria, the usual suspects, we'll mention a few of those in a minute, are assigning blame. They're using this report to assign blame. But there is no evidence of a chemical weapons attack in this report, okay? There is chlorine, that's the important part. There's some chlorine substances present. They're not necessarily weaponized chemical weapons, chlorine. They could be, but there's a lot more questions left unanswered here. So no traces of sarin. This is really important. This was the big talking point a year ago, that probably it was a mixture of sarin and chlorine. Why is this important? We'll show you in a minute. No bodies to prove that the victims died by a chlorine bomb. So if there was no sarin, that means the victims in those horrific YouTube videos that everybody held up and saw, there were 2 sets of YouTube videos. Again, this is very complex, and we only have a limited time to show you what we're going to show you here. But that means the victims who died, Mike, would have had to have been killed by chlorine, right? So there are no bodies. So these are huge problems with this investigation. And the images of the children foaming, the foaming mouths is actually brought under question here. So this is what's important. So this was just a few weeks ago. This is the Riam Dalati, BBC producer and researcher who worked on saving Syria's children. He tweeted this, and we reported on this at the UK column when it happened, but he said, "I can prove without a doubt that the Douma hospital scene was staged." This is really important. And he followed up with this, as one of the 3 or 4 people filming the scene was Dr. Abu Bakr Hanan, a brute and shifty doctor affiliated with Jaish al-Islam. Well, we knew it was staged when it was released. How did we know that? Well, because the White Helmets released a video and because the children weren't showing any symptoms of a chemical attack. It seemed like they were just being hosed down with a garden hose, but the media ran with it nonetheless and said it was a chemical attack, and they said there was sarin, and the White Helmets fake hospital scene. This is the media, I call him a media victim. His name was Hassan Daib. Here he is before. This is what went out in the press. Okay, this is the underground hospital in Douma. He's being hosed down by the White Helmets, and they're saying this is a sarin attack. You see the little girl in the background? All these kids have been hosed down, babies with respirator masks on, making it look like they're having they're been attacked by the Assad regime in a chlorine or a sarin attack.
And most of these, a lot of these kids having inhalers shoved down their throats as well.
Nebulizers,
yes,
and inhalers shoved into their mouth and then pulled, and then they're filming that. So this was part of the White Helmets media production for this event. And here he is afterwards. He had no effects of any chemical weapons. So this scene at the hospital in Douma was faked. This was staged, beyond any doubt, okay? So there's already fakery here, Mike, at this scene. And the media have already used this as a pretext to launch a cruise missile strikes and airstrikes by the US, UK, and France, okay? This part has already been used, was used to justify the airstrike, and it was fake. It's proven fake. The OPCW report also backs up that it probably had staging, but we know that 100% this was a faked scene. It was filmed, and the politicians swallowed it hook, line, and sinker.
Oh, they've never done that before, have they?
They would never do that. No, they of course not. They would have learned after Iraq. And so this is why this is important. No sarin, no traces of sarin. In fact, Mike, no banned scheduled substances found in this report. But this is from, Mike, a year ago. This is April 11th, 2018. And deadly sarin gas used in Syria chemical attack leaves victims foaming at the mouth before suffering seizures.
And that's the Daily Mail?
That's the Daily Mail. That was being pumped out across many different media outlets, all the broadcast news channels in the US. Everybody was using these talking points, okay? And look at the image they're using below. That's the children in the hospital being hosed down. That's fake. It has nothing to do even with what they're accusing this of being, with sarin poisoning of the kids on the other video in the basement, all the dead bodies with the foaming at the mouth, okay?
Yeah.
So there's 2 bits of fakery here. This is really important. They're pushing this really hard, sarin, because that was the justification. Those videos that came out of the dead children with the foam is attached to the sarin talking point.
Yeah.
Now the sarin talking point is finished, okay? It's dead. So that means they don't have an answer for all the kids with what looks like shaving cream sprayed into their mouths and coming out of their nostrils, okay? We don't know exactly what it is because there are no bodies that anybody can find to do any autopsies on. Apparently they didn't think that was important enough to do any forensic medical analysis to find out what actually might have killed the children and people in the videos of the dead bodies, okay? Now, why is this important? Well, this queued up the experts, Mike, at the time. This is Hamish de Breton Gordon. He is one of the go-to guys for the mainstream media on the subject of chemical weapons. And they asked him, and the sarin talking point was front and center at that time. So you can go through and you can read and a lot of the statements made and tweets by Hamish to Bretton Gordon. There's a lot of people probably deleting tweets right now, quite fast. But these are the sort of experts they would call up to sort of help to advance this line of questioning or these claims. Okay, so here he is. I mean, this was the article here, and if you go to this article on the Telegraph, if you manage to punch through the paywall, you'll see statements in the article, and also go look at the comments too. Looks possibly to be a mixture of chlorine and the nerve agent sarin, and of course there's a totally unrelated image that's saying children receiving oxygen after a chemical weapons attack in Douma. That's a lie. Okay, so this is fake news all around. We're going back a year later, and we're just showing you one example of thousands of a Niagara Falls of fake news and disinformation in the wake of the Douma attacks, just in the 72 hours after the event, okay? So the establishment, rearguard action, then you have people like Elliot Higgins here in a panic, trying to deflect. This was what he tweeted on March 2nd. He said, two unnamed U.S. officials claimed blood and urine from Douma tested positive for chlorine and a nerve agent. But the OPCW was quite clear there was no sign of a nerve agent in chlorine. Chlorine wasn't detectable in blood and urine, so where's the evidence? So this is rearguard action by the establishment. This is Bellingcat founder Elliot Higgins, who is trying to deflect here. Why? Because people like Elliot Higgins and others were pushing, were talking about kind of greasing the tracks for this sarin talking point. This was what was needed for an airstrike. Chlorine was not enough. This is the important part, okay? What Elliot is pointing to here might possibly be true. This is a break from his usual routine. He's actually challenging one of the NATO member states' claims here, but of course he waited a year to do it, as it's convenient now because the whole story is falling apart. The OPCW report is a total flop, and so you're getting things like this. So that's fake news. So here's when we get into the really bizarre stuff of this report. And I encourage people to go and read this report. The magic cylinder. Look in the background. This is the famous selfie taken by one of the moderate rebels with an old gas mask on. It doesn't look like it's secure on their mic, but in the background is a yellow canister on a beautiful bed there, and that's meant to be a chlorine bomb, okay? That's meant to be a chlorine bomb.
I have to say that yellow canister, Patrick, on that particular image, looks in a lot better condition than the yellow canister photographs from the report itself. And so that doesn't look like the same yellow canister to me.
I think it is, Mike, but we'll have to inspect the elements a little more anyway. But this is how did it get on the bed? Well, one would think that it fell through the ceiling, right? Well, not according to the OPCW. And here we get to the mystery of the magic cylinder. And you can see this is a screenshot from the internal part of this graphic. The white part is actually from the OPCW's report. Apparently, Mike, this magic cylinder landed on the floor in the bottom corner of the room and managed to jump up into the air and 2 meters away in a diagonal fashion and jump up onto the bed, like all randy yellow cylinders do. So how did that happen? There's no explanation for it. They don't offer any explanation for it at all. It's just left there as a kind of a JFK magic bullet mystery, okay? And so I guess they're working on an explanation for this. So stay tuned. Bellingcat might have some explanation for how this miracle of physics took place. But this alone, Mike, discredits the report in many people's opinion. And this is the central talk. They need to make this work, because without this, they don't have their Assad regime dropped a chlorine bomb from a helicopter. They absolutely need this to work. And so what did they do? They put a turd in the punch bowl. So this is bad, okay? There's no other way to
describe it.
It's really bad. And we're not laughing because we do take this seriously. We take the event seriously, but this report, some of it is utterly ridiculous. And we're just giving you an honest opinion here. So what does the evidence really tell us? Well, it tells us that the hospital scene was staged, that the casualty numbers were faked. They claimed in the media, Mike, and I'll show you Treason May's speech, but that there was 500 people treated for chemical weapons attack and 70 people died. You read the report, they can't decide whether it was 40, 70, and even then the witness statements are totally conflicting. Some say none, okay? So the MSN, the US, UK governments, the sarin claims were a lie. This is what we've learned from this report. The blood and the urine samples were fake. They never existed. If we haven't seen them by now, they don't exist. They would have been produced anyway, right? So the main witnesses are terrorist affiliated, including the white helmets. That's a fact. The magic cylinder discredits the airdrop theory, at least for that particular cylinder. There's another cylinder that's, we're told, landed on a roof, magically punched a hole in the roof and then reversed a few inches and then sprayed its gas down into the 3 floors into the basement of a building and killed all these people. That's the other conspiracy theory that we didn't want to get into. That's even more magical than this magic cylinder in some ways. And the images of children foaming at the mouth are more than likely staged based on the questions raised in this OPCW report. Of course, we're going to interpret this totally differently than people who are totally going hell for leather to bomb the Syrians, Mike. So why is this important? Think about this. There's no sarin, Mike. So I turned back the time machine to Theresa May's big speech, fire and brimstone speech last April after this, putting her case to bomb Syria. And here's what she said at the time. She said, on Saturday, the 7th of April, 75 people, including young children, were killed in a horrific attack in Douma, and there were 500 further casualties. Did she have any confirmation of this at the time?
No.
But she's speaking as if it happened, right? But it didn't happen.
No.
According to the evidence. Okay, that didn't happen. What else did she say? Well, let's see. UK medical and scientific experts have analyzed open source reports. That's things floating around on the internet. Open source is things on the internet. Images and video footage from the incident concluded that the victims were exposed to a toxic chemical. How could they know?
But we haven't seen any bodies.
There's no bodies, so it's just based on watching YouTube videos. Is this a way for a government to gather intelligence and then use that to decide whether they're going to attack another sovereign member of the United Nations? By YouTube?
That's a very good question.
Watching YouTube videos? That's enough? Interesting question. So this is corroborated by first-hand accounts from NGO and aid workers, the White Helmets, funded by the UK government, terrorist affiliated, share facilities with Jabhat al-Nusra in different sites in Syria. Members include people in militant groups, armed. That's a fact. So while the World Health Organization received reports, which reports, we're not sure, and from who, we don't know, that hundreds of patients arrived at Syrian health facilities on Saturday night with signs and symptoms consistent with exposure to toxic chemicals. That's not true. We showed you the hospital scene was faked. So this statement is not true either. So what is true in this speech, Mike? I kept digging. And maybe this is true. Let's try this. And based on our assessment, we do not think that these reports could be falsified on this scale. Oh, really? Okay. Well, is there any more? I kept looking. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Syrian regime has reportedly been attempting to conceal evidence by searching evacuees from Douma to ensure samples are not being smuggled out from the area. What do you reckon? Do you think that's true, Mike?
I don't think that's true.
What do you think that is?
I think that's
fake
news.
Of course it's fake news. So, and last but not least, open source accounts state that barrel bombs were used to deliver the chemicals. Is that true?
No.
I don't think so. That's also fake news. I'm showing you 10% of her speech, Mike. And I guarantee you, if I showed you the other 90%, it's pretty much the same thing. The whole thing is a total fabrication. Okay, so, and finally she said, we will continue to strengthen the international coalition we have built since the attack.
On Salisbury.
On Salisbury. Well, there you go, Mike. It all comes together nicely in the end, doesn't it? What do you think of that?
We've come full circle here, Patrick.
It's a great story, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I just want to add to people, this is important. The day before this report came out, this is published on February 28th by the Huffington Post, ran a defamation piece against Vanessa Beeley and Piers Robinson and the Working Group on Syria Propaganda and Media. And this was by the senior editor, Chris York. So this is, and what he mentioned in his article is interesting, Mike, was he was attacking Vanessa for a claim she made about a rebel's chemical weapons factory, which she visited a site firsthand in Douma, or in that part of Damascus. And that also, part of that was refuted in the OPCW report. So one would say, what are the odds that the Huffington Post would release this article slandering Vanessa Beeley and the others on this exact same point, which was refuted in the OPCW
Did they
report.
get you the chance to see that report before it was made public?
Was it leaked to the media? Is that possible? And who would have done that? Who would be privy to such leaks? Bellingcat, perhaps?
Possibly.
Possibly. So we can confirm that there is a coordinated smear attack. This also came out around the same time. This is yesterday, in fact. This is from David Ostland from The Independent, basically saying, and trying to pull Vanessa Beeley and others into the Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitism talking point. So basically, once House room is granted to such relentlessly self-preening charlatans as Vanessa Beeley, Gilad Atzmon, and David Icke, it's perilously short step to the political judgment centered out by shoddy output of propaganda-driven state broadcasters, half-arsed alt-left websites, and crankier fringes of the trot diaspora. It's just a lot of venom and vitriol, and it's a totally...
And hypocrisy, Patrick, and hypocrisy, because if there's anything that you've demonstrated in the last 10 minutes, shoddy output of propaganda-driven, I mean, this is exactly...
By state broadcasters?
Yes, this is exactly what you've demonstrated. So,
like the BBC, for instance, right? So this is interesting. The mainstream media is coordinating smear campaigns targeting independent journalists, including many of the people that you've probably seen on this show.
Yeah.
So what's going on here? What a state of play, Mike.
Absolutely. Well, this is the fusion doctrine at work, I think. But anyway, look, we're past time actually, but just let's end on this one. Some time ago, David Ellis published this article, EU Military Union is Budgetary Union, on the UK Column website. That was in September 2016. And what it says is the fate of Her Majesty's Armed Forces as an independent national defence is inextricably bound up with the fate of prime UK defence industry, and he mentions Rolls-Royce as an example. But we've been talking about the effective asset stripping of Rolls-Royce over the last 12 months, and we see more of that over the weekend. Rolls-Royce to sell most of its civil nuclear business in a deal that could be worth as much as £200 million. This is mainly things like temperature sensors and radiation level sensors for civilian reactors. It doesn't affect the Hinkley Point C nuclear plant, but not just that. Then also they've pulled out of the Turkish fighter jet bid, so that has seen their share price drop significantly. And of course we've been talking about, it also came alongside an annual loss of £2.9 billion for 2018 that was announced a couple of days ago.
Huge loss.
That's a huge loss. So look, for more background on this, I just want to end up by saying, for more background on this, do go and have a read at David Ellis's article, Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems Going Cheap, from January 2017. It's absolutely still relevant. And he was pointing out in January 2017 that this was exactly the type of thing that we were going to see. So get that out and get that shared. And can also just remind people, finally, to share this article, Brexit, the Constitutional Position by John Bingley. It's extremely important that this goes out. I do appreciate that it's a heavy read for people. It was written specifically for the House of Lords. But nonetheless, it's the key points in this, particularly in the final section of this article, are extremely important to the Brexit discussion, and it's important that this does get, some wider discussion and perhaps into the mainstream media as well, if that could be arranged. So do share that article as much as possible. Well, look, we've got to leave it there. We're a few minutes over time. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. on Wednesday as usual. We shall see you then. Bye-bye.